Welcome everybody to our next installment in the Digital Humanities After Hours lecture series. And I'm really happy to present today's speaker, Emily Lethbridge, Associate Research Professor at the Magnússon Institute for Icelandic Studies. Today presenting us her talk, Feminist DH, Data in the Kvennasbók Project Database. Thank you, Emily.
Hi everyone, online and here. Thank you for coming. Thank you, both of you, for the invitation to speak in this series. I'm a bit disappointed. I probably shouldn't get myself popcorn while I speak, but maybe afterwards. Anyway, my plan for today is to talk briefly. I'd like to introduce you all to the Kvennasbók research project. I'll spend a little bit of time making some comments on feminist DH, what is it, and why is it an important field within digital humanities. And then we'll take a dive into the Kvennasbók database. And I'm delighted to have one of my project partners in crime here in the room with us. So hopefully you won't disagree with anything that I'll say. So, we'll get started. Hér komin gestur. We have a guest. Þórunn, það streymi, bara þannig þú veist af því. Það streymi, það verður streymi. En það alltaf. Anyway, so Kvennasbók is a research project that was funded by Árni's. We got a grant in 2023, and it's a classic 3-year collaborative research project, funded till 2026. There are 3 principal strands or kind of parts to the project, and these are the 3 columns to the left. Firstly, we're looking at the sagas. We're looking at women in landscape contexts in the saga narratives, in the Icelandic sögur. Who are they? Where do we see them? And how does location or their relationship with the landscape impact on the roles that they play in the narratives? We're also interested in how memories or traces of these women in the landscape are visible or not from a more landscape heritage perspective today. Then the middle column or theme is travel writing, and this is specifically travel writing on Iceland by women. So we are trying to shift the focus from William Morris, on the one hand, to his daughter May Morris, who in fact came to Iceland 3 times, to William's 2 times. This is one of many examples, and the history of travel writing on Iceland has been probably inevitably very male-centred, or dominated. But of course women came here too. So who were they and what traces of their visits remain? And then there's a third strand, this practice as research strand, and this is conducted in collaboration with in part. And in this strand we are taking the saga women and the places in the landscape that these women are associated with back into the landscape, and we are having conversations and co-creating various kind of works, really, artistic works with local communities, and specifically women in local communities. So this is a way of opening up conversations and bringing our research into a different kind of social environment. So, in brief, the project aims to think about whose stories are told in the sagas and over time in an Icelandic context, and whose stories have been pushed to the margins or buried or erased. And we have this landscape or material focus. But we also, data and the collection of data and the development of a new database is really important to this project as well. The first point I wanted to make with regard to the data is that, importantly, we are building on already existing data infrastructure and projects. So we have been, as much as we could, we've been reusing and recycling the database infrastructure and data from earlier projects, namely the Icelandic saga map on the one hand, Nafnith on the other hand, and what all of these databases, each project has its own database, but we share data across the platforms, place name data, and also some of the infrastructure, the digital map platform or viewer, and the georeferenced texts. And I think just a brief point I was going to make on open data and linking open data. This is something that is a requirement now in any digital project funded by Árni. We're getting there, I think, with this project. We've got some time to go still. In general, I do think we need to do better, though, in making the data findable and accessible according to the FAIR principles. And so I'm glad of this opportunity to give a talk on the data and that sort of prompt to review where we are on that respect. So why feminist DH? In the application, the project application, we didn't actually set the digital database work up specifically as a feminist DH project. But I think the work that we're doing fits very well into other projects and work being conducted from feminist DH perspectives. How does a feminist DH, feminist digital humanities, impact on or relate to, for example, what we might call the politics of knowledge representation? Hi, welcome. How does a feminist DH project or work relate to forms of explicit or implicit bias in the past and the present? So I think we can use our database as well as our research to try to highlight the importance of work in this field. And I think acknowledging the theoretical, the feminist DH frame in which we're working is useful and relevant in different ways. On the one hand, with regard to the methods or the methodologies that we're using, who's doing the work and how are we doing it, who's doing the different types of work within the project, but also the aims of the project itself, the data that is being assembled and curated. So both back end and front end. On this slide, you can see the cover of a brand new book that just came out, open source, Feminist Digital Humanities Intersections in Practice. And there I've highlighted a brief quotation that I felt explained probably more coherently than I have what feminist DH is. So authors in this edited volume theorise feminist DH practices as sites of possibility for exploring, exposing and revaluing marginalised forms of knowledge production by enacting new modes and processes of meaning making. As such, the chapters reflect on what it means to be a feminist and a technologist, and how feminist practice intervenes in digital humanities analyses, methodologies, infrastructures and pedagogies, providing intersectional critical perspectives to expose inequities that result from normative assumptions. Why feminist DH? If we think briefly about contemporary digital environments, not least social media platforms, but not only, then we know, and there is general acknowledgement and recognition that these platforms, these sites are open for misogynistic perspectives. A recent book on AI and gender equality by Laura Bates makes for fairly shocking reading. She writes, with regard to misogyny and AI, we've arrived at a critical moment. We're building a whole new world, but the inequalities and oppression of our current society are being baked into its very foundations. And if the harassment and violence that have blighted the lives of women and minoritized communities for centuries are being coded into the fabric of the future systems, environments and programs that will form the basis of all our lives over the coming decades, unravelling those forms of prejudice is going to become a million times harder. Worse, that prejudice might become entrenched and even exacerbated, dragging the most vulnerable in our society backwards as we supposedly hurtle forwards into a glittering new world. On the right-hand side of this slide, if you're interested in reading more about this, is a recent article published in Nature, a review article also published open access. Maybe the links can go around or be put up on the website later for those who'd like to look more closely at this. The word cloud is a figure from this study on the right. Here are a couple of inspirational projects, not going so far back, but the feminist principles of the internet were drafted first in 2014, and they comprise a series of statements that offer a gender and sexual rights lens on critical internet-related rights. The website doesn't seem to have had much activity in recent years, but a more recent project that was funded just up to a couple of years ago is this project, Full Stack Feminism, part of the Intersections Feminism, Technology and Digital Humanities Network. And this is was a 2-year project that aimed to take action against bias and implicit as well as explicit forms of discrimination that manifest in our digital worlds and technologies, with a focus firstly on data and archives, secondly on infrastructure, coding and tools, and thirdly on access, experience and integration. So check out those links. Now on to Kvennaspor and the Kvennaspor database. So in developing the proposal for the Kvennaspor research project, I noticed, or I'd become aware of, 2 fairly significant gaps with regard to research, academic research on the one hand and digital tools on the other. Firstly, we have landscape research on saga landscapes in the narratives themselves. When I came to look more closely at this topic, which is something that I've been thinking about for a number of years, I realised that almost all of the studies were very focused on the male characters, with little or no attention paid to any of the female characters. So this is an increasingly a growing kind of field of research. The sagas are, of course, a fantastic corpus to study with an eye to landscapes, place names, and the relationship between story and place. But people had been publishing, and most interested, myself included, without thinking very critically about the topic. Characters like Grettir, Gisli, the outlaws, their relationship with landscape, the Icelandic landscape, have been under focus. Where were the women in all of this? So that was one gap. A second gap was within the field of the history of travel writing on Iceland, and especially travel writing that was focused on saga sites, or those travellers to Iceland in the 19th and 20th century who visited Iceland because they were translating or enthusiastic about the sagas, which from the 19th century were being translated into English and other languages. So on the Icelandic saga map, we had, or specifically Zachary, who's with us in the room today, had georeferenced the travel writing by William Morris, his 1871 and 1873 diaries, W.G. Collingwood, 1897, Metcalfe in 1861, and Baring Gould in 1863. And we suddenly realised, that this was not necessarily very representative of who was coming to Iceland. So where were the women in this context? In part, the Kvennaspor project was an effort to do something about this blindness. If we could, the thinking went back then, if we could get funding to address the imbalance in these two related areas, then we could ask all kinds of questions and attempt to answer them. And these are questions along the lines of, with regard to the sagas, where do we see women in saga landscapes? Where are they placed in landscape contexts? What types of places are they associated with? How much or how little do women move from one to another place in the sagas, and do they do that independently or in the company of husbands or male relatives? Broadly, how does their emplacement relate to the events in which they're involved and the attention that's directed towards them in the narrative? So what do we see, but also importantly, what do we not see? So, where we have detailed descriptions of journeys made by male characters in the sagas, do we have correspondingly detailed descriptions of journeys made by female characters in the sagas? And the answer, probably unsurprisingly, was for the most part no. So we're trying to fill in these gaps. With regard to the travel writing and the history of travel writing on Iceland, we know that women travelled to Iceland. So how many women took this on? How many women travelled to Iceland? When? Who were they? Did they travel independently or as part of a group? How much interest or knowledge did these women display regarding the sagas and saga sites? Did they know Icelandic? Were they corresponding? Did they meet Icelanders? How far afield in Iceland did they go once they were here? Was it just the Golden Circle, or did they get off the main tourist beat? And whom did they meet, or whose travel works did they know? So these are just a few examples of questions that the data collection hoped to answer. So now onto the database itself. You won't be able to see the small text, but it's okay. It's just to give a bit of a flavour. So work on the two parts of the database: the travel, the saga women on the one hand, and their landscape contexts, and then the travel writing on the other hand, began in 2023. And in both instances, we were looking at the sources and inputting the data manually. For the saga data, an MA student at that time took on that work and had a job over the summer working, reading through the corpus of sagas and extracting the data, also helping to format, sort of shape the database itself, so deciding what categories of data would be useful. And the categories that we settled on, which were not exhaustive, but really the constraints of time and funding meant that we couldn't do everything. Firstly, just the names of the female characters, or where those names are not in the record, finding a way of putting these unnamed women in the database. We were interested in what category of character, what type of character these women were. So, this relates to questions of social status, age. We were interested in what kind of activity these women were portrayed or represented in the sagas as carrying out, and the physical location of that activity. Was there a specific place name associated with the part of the narrative in which they feature? Were they moving from one place to another or not? So the data that Marie-Sophie Besson, who was the student working on this part of the project, assembled, the data accumulated, and some of it was straight, binary yes, no. Are female characters portrayed as being inside or outside? What might that tell us about the context in which women are presented in the sagas? But in other instances, the data was richer, and in some cases it required annotation. In all, this data combines now to form a really rich corpus that we can mine both quantitatively for patterns. What's the proportion of women who we see outside as opposed to inside on any given occasion, but also qualitatively. So we can use this database now to identify, or as a departure point for more qualitative analysis of what women are doing and where in the context of the sagas. And just because it's a lovely opportunity to advertise it, Marie completed her thesis last year. It was actually a thesis in Icelandic as a second language, and it is available on Skemman and has got an excellent mark. So that was a very exciting part of our work. Moving on to the travel data. No, I'm going this way. The person who was responsible for this part of our project research was Zachary Melton. Could turn the camera around. Well, he's finished his popcorn, so he could give a Colgate smile, but I don't want to mess up your camera setup, Zachary began working on amongst other things, collecting information about women who travelled to Iceland in the spring of 23. His work involved combing various archives, digitised newspapers, following up references in one travel account, and trying to compile as extensive as possible a record of the women who travelled to Iceland in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And we went from a list of just a handful, maybe some 20 or so, to over 200. And there are still many others out there, I think, that we haven't yet tracked down. So that just was a fantastic effort in, drawing attention to over 200 women whose stories haven't been part of the more mainstream history of tourism, travel to Iceland. Zachary was collecting, of course, the names of the travellers, biographical information about them where possible. Some of these women proved to be very difficult to track down. For the most part, they were either from the British Isles or from North America, so we were focusing on the English writing, the English language tradition of travel to Iceland. And of course, there's much more to be found in from Scandinavian countries or from continental Europe. That will be another project. We were establishing the dates of their travel, trying to find any kind of documentation relating to their travel, whether that was archival or printed. And in particular, we were interested in picking out the instances where either specific sagas were mentioned or saga sites. So trying to gauge the level of knowledge or interest in the sagas amongst this corpus of 200 women. We were interested, amongst other things, also in knowing something more about their travel status, so that was a category recorded in the database. How were they referring to other people in their travel narratives? Were they people they were travelling with, people they mentioned in their publications, people they met in person? How did they travel here? I love this. Zachary can tell you who came to Iceland in a Zeppelin. Maybe I'll leave that for the questions. But yeah, just some fairly granular detail that gives some, well, will provide hopefully a platform for further research in due course. Here we can also see the names of just a few of the A's, a few of the women beginning with A, what kind of a traveller they were, and what themes they treated in their travel writing as well. So for this part of the project, we've got further in making this data accessible and searchable than we have for the saga women. So we have a beautiful front end that Trausti Dagsson designed for us. He was also the programmer who developed the back end of this project. Top left here, we have the entry for Elizabeth Jane Oswald, a Scottish woman who came to Iceland 3 times in the 1870s and published a really fantastic book about saga sites in the early 1880s. So this is the back end on the basis of Zachary's data collection. If you go onto our website, you can find, she will be amongst the travelling women. Clicking on travelling women will bring us 3 options: women, writing, and networks. So in women she'll be one of these 200 icons, and if you click on her icon, then you'll get a brief biography, information about her writing on Iceland, information about the sources that we found used to put together her relationship to Iceland. And more than that, a big part of this work, I think, and especially now, it's of course not just to do with creating the data set. Equally important is how we contextualize and use the data that we have assembled. And one of the ways in which we're contextualizing the travel data is by thinking about the social networks. So for every woman who travelled to Iceland and who mentions the name of another individual in their writing, they have an entry in the database, and so we can see some of these names will be very familiar, others may not be found readily elsewhere. But it's very interesting to see, who these women met, some of the major cultural elites of the time in Iceland. And that in turn gives us a richer understanding of the context in which these foreign women, visitors to Iceland, were exploring and getting to know Icelanders and places around Iceland. Yes. Another way of contextualizing both the travel and the saga data is through geography and maps. So we can bring these 2 sets of data together to think about or to look at where these women went, which saga sites did they visit, which sagas did they know about. If you follow the links through, on the Kvennaspor website, you'll see that a number of, unsurprisingly, Bergþórshvol was one of the top saga destinations of the time, if not now. A number of women refer to Bergþórshvol explicitly in their writing about Iceland. So we can use this to link through into their accounts and to see then how they describe their experiences of visiting Bergþórshvol. And here on the Saga Map platform at the moment, it will soon be linked to the Kvennaskóla website. We can click on Bergþórshvol and we'll get a reference to the georeferenced text in this is Elizabeth Jane Oswald. Just a few final thoughts, wrapping up. We still have a year or so to go on this project, and there is a lot of work, of course, that remains to be done. But we have already, I think, made some exciting contributions to research and publications. Marie's dissertation, which I believe is about to come out as an article. Zachary's published a number of articles, and there are other parts of the project that you can find out more about on our website. On this point of contextualising work, for me, this project and the database and the data set that we have assembled, it's not a record simply of saga women and their narrative roles on the one hand, or of female visitors to Iceland and their writing in and of itself. Of course, it can be used as such for future research, should people so wish, but the two strands also relate to each other and to other research fields as well. So I hope that this data will be reused and beyond the length of the formal length of this project. Beyond that, it's a really, well, for me, one of the most important aspects is the opportunity to raise awareness, to recalibrate general perceptions about saga characters in the Icelandic landscape, and also general perspectives regarding saga pilgrimage or tourism in the 19th and 20th centuries. Finally, and this is not something that I will go on to, although I did prepare an extra bonus slide, if there was still popcorn available. Thank you. Preparing this talk, as I mentioned at the beginning, actually was a really useful opportunity to think about what we have achieved with regard to the data, the digital side of the project. How are we doing, and how might Mr. Stafrætni Hugvísinda help us and other projects as the grant period ends? So if you want a little sneak preview, that's that. And I'll just keep that up. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any, or happy to eat popcorn if there are no questions.